The night Layla Washington nearly died, she was wearing rubber gloves and carrying a mop. She wasn't supposed to be on the 42nd floor. She wasn't supposed to be in that building at all past midnight. And she was absolutely not supposed to be crouched behind the rear seats of a bulletproof SUV, pressing her hand over her own mouth so hard she could feel her teeth through her cheek. Listening to men shout in a language she didn't speak, about a problem she didn't understand, with guns she couldn't see but could absolutely hear. 3 shots. Then 2 more. Then silence so sharp it had edges. The car door opened. Someone got in. The engine turned over, smooth, expensive, unhurried, like whoever was driving had done this before. Like whatever had happened in that parking garage was another Tuesday. The SUV moved. Fast. Layla didn't breathe. Didn't move. Didn't pray, because praying felt too loud. She just counted. 1, 2, 3. The way her mother taught her when she was 7 years old, and the world felt too big and too dangerous and completely indifferent to small girls who needed it to slow down. She counted to 40 before she allowed herself one thought. What have I gotten myself into? She didn't know yet. But the answer was already moving at 90 miles an hour down a highway with no lights, no exits she could see, and a man in the front seat who hadn't said a single word. Before the car, before the garage, before any of it, here is who Layla Washington was. She was 28 years old. Night shift. 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when the money needed to stretch, which it always did. She cleaned the Meridian Tower downtown, all 42 floors of it, starting at the bottom and working up, floor by floor, the way she did everything in her life. The 42nd floor was the top. Methodically, quietly, without complaint. She had a system. She had a schedule. She had a thermos of coffee she made at home because the vending machines in the basement break room charged $4 a cup, and $4 was $4. She'd set it down beside the service elevator on the 42nd floor when the shouting started. She never went back for it. She cleaned 7 buildings in the district. One of them housed an investigative journalism outlet on the 4th floor, a small operation, serious reputation. A journalist there named David Osei had given her his card once, carefully, over bad coffee in the break room at 2 in the morning. If you ever decide you want to talk, he'd said. She hadn't had anything to tell him. She'd kept the card anyway, behind her library card, in the dark at the back of her phone case. 2 years earlier, her mother's storage warehouse on DeLand and 9th had burned to the ground in November, taking with it the stored belongings of 40 families who hadn't yet been able to move them. She was not supposed to be on the 42nd floor that night. That floor belonged to a colleague named Dion. But Dion had called in sick at 10 p.m., and Layla had picked up the shift because that's what you do when your brother's tuition bill arrives and the number on it doesn't care about your feelings. So she was there. Wrong floor. Wrong time. Nobody's fault. Just the kind of small decision that looks invisible until it isn't. She heard the shouting before she saw anything. Korean, sharp, urgent, the kind of tone that doesn't need translation. Then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then the kind of silence that replaces a sound you wish you hadn't heard. She didn't run toward it. She was already moving toward the service elevator when the stairwell door exploded open and 3 men in suits came through it at a sprint. She dove, pillar, then parked cars, then the nearest vehicle she could get open, and pulled the door shut behind her before she'd made a single conscious decision about it. The car was still for 11 minutes. She counted. Then the front door opened. Closed. The engine started, and they were moving before she could decide whether to announce herself or stay hidden, and by the time she decided, the moment had already passed. They drove for what felt like 30 minutes. Could have been 20. Could have been more. She had no landmarks. No signal on her phone. No plan. The SUV stopped. Silence. Then the rear door, her door, opened. A man crouched down into the space she occupied. He didn't reach for her. Didn't shout. He simply lowered himself to her level and looked at her the way someone looks at an equation they're deciding whether to solve or discard. Mid-30s. Dark suit, not a wrinkle in it despite whatever had just happened. A jaw that suggested structure. And a scar, thin, deliberate-looking, running along the left side of that jaw, that he made no attempt to hide and no attempt to explain. That was the part that frightened her most. Not the gun she could see holstered beneath his jacket. Not the two men standing 10 feet behind him with expressions like closed doors. The calm. The absolute, unhurried calm of a man who had found a stranger hiding in his vehicle and was only mildly inconvenienced by it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said in perfect, unaccented English, "You have exactly 30 seconds to convince me you're not a problem." Layla Washington, who had been quietly terrified for the last half hour, took one breath. "I'm a janitor," she said. "I clean floors. I have a bus pass and $37 in my account. I am not your problem." Something moved across his face. Not a smile. The architecture of a smile, the suggestion that somewhere inside him, the structure for it still existed. He reached into the seat pocket beside her and produced a black cloth hood. Held it out between two fingers like it was an entirely ordinary thing to offer a person. "Put this on." She stared at it. "For your safety," he said. "Not mine." And there it was, the question that would follow Layla Washington for the next 6 weeks of her life. The question she still hasn't fully answered. Was he protecting her? Or was that just what men like him said when they wanted you to stop asking questions and go quietly? She took the hood. She put it on. And the door closed. The hood came off in a hallway. Not a hallway like anything Layla had ever cleaned. 12-foot ceilings. Stone floors. The kind of quiet that only exists when walls are thick enough to swallow sound whole. Somewhere outside, and she could tell they were far outside the city now, no ambient noise, no sirens, nothing. There were dogs she could hear but not see. A man was waiting for her. Not Hyunwoo. Someone younger, harder in a different way. Like a blade that had been sharpened so many times it had forgotten it was ever anything else. He introduced himself as Teo. No last name. Head of security, she would later understand. Though that title flattened what he actually was, which was the person Hyunwoo trusted to make every problem disappear before it became one. The way the other men in the hallway adjusted their posture when he appeared confirmed it before she'd had time to ask. He showed her to a room. Guest room, though that word felt absurd for what it was. The bed alone probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. The bathroom had heated floors. There was a robe hanging on the back of the door that she was afraid to touch. He set a folded set of clothes on the chair by the window. Then he turned to leave. She asked when she could go home. He paused at the door. Considered the question with the patience of someone who had answered it before, in other rooms, for other people. "You've seen too much to leave tonight," he said. "Tomorrow the boss will decide." The door didn't lock. She checked. That almost made it worse. She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of that expensive bed in those borrowed clothes, and she thought. The way she always thought when she was frightened, which was carefully and in order. The men in the parking garage. They weren't police. She knew that much before the first shot. Police announced themselves. Police have a cadence, a procedure. These men moved like they were operating outside of every cadence she'd ever seen. Coordinated, private, answerable to no one visible. The SUV. She'd had 11 minutes on the floor of it in the dark, and she'd used them. Her hand had found the interior panel of the door beside her. Solid in a way that standard vehicles aren't. Reinforced. The windows, when she'd carefully pressed her palm against one, didn't flex at all. Bulletproof glass has a particular stillness to it. She'd read that somewhere once, the way she read everything. Filing it away in the quiet library of herself, never knowing what she'd need. The silence of the vehicle, too. Even at speed, almost nothing came through, not road noise, not wind, not the world outside. That kind of insulation wasn't standard. It was deliberate. The car was built to contain whatever happened inside it and exclude whatever happened out. She looked at the ceiling of this room, and she thought about the man who owned it, and the car, and whatever had happened in that garage. And she understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has spent years reading rooms full of powerful people, that she had not wandered into something small. What she didn't know yet was that it had already touched her, that somewhere in the distance between the warehouse on DeLand and 9th and the gate she had just been driven through, the two things were the same thing. He came in the morning. Alone. No Teo. No escorts. Just Hyunwoo Jang, in a different suit than the night before, carrying 2 cups of coffee like that was a completely reasonable thing for a man like him to do. He set one in front of her. Without his entourage, he was different. Not warmer, not softer, more precise, like the removal of witnesses had stripped away whatever performance he maintained for other people, and what was left was just the actual version of him. Quieter, more deliberate. The kind of man who thought before every sentence and never used two words when one would do. He looked at her for a long moment before he said anything. "You're not afraid of me." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, slightly curious, slightly off balance, like she'd done something he hadn't prepared for. "I'm terrified of you," Layla said. "I'm just better at math than fear. And right now the math says you need something from me, or I'd already be gone." The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. He sat down across from her, set his coffee cup down, looked at the table between them the way someone looks at a decision they've already made but haven't yet said out loud. 3 days ago, my engagement was publicly announced, he said. The woman in question withdrew 3 days ago. She understood, more clearly than I had explained it to her, what the role actually required. The surveillance, the scrutiny, the specific danger of standing beside me publicly at this moment. She was not wrong to refuse it. I didn't try to change her mind. The announcement, however, cannot be retracted. Not without consequences I'm not prepared to absorb right now. My father's organization is in transition. There are people who believe that transition should end with someone other than me in this position. People who have been waiting for a visible crack, a moment of weakness they can point to and say, he cannot hold this together. A broken engagement, publicly announced and then publicly dissolved, is exactly that moment. My rivals are watching. They're looking for the crack. I need someone beside me for 6 weeks. Someone present, convincing, and completely outside my world. He looked up. Someone no one would ever expect. The number he named was $20,000 per week for 6 weeks, with a contract, a cover story, and a car to take her home the moment it was done. Layla said no. He doubled it. She said no again, and then she sat there. She didn't get up, didn't reach for her things, didn't ask him to call her a car. She just sat there with her hands around the coffee cup he'd brought her, which was, she noticed despite herself, made exactly the way she would have made it, like someone had taken the time to find out. She sat there, and that was its own kind of answer. One she hadn't meant to give, one she couldn't quite take back. Hyunwoo Jang looked at her and waited, with the patience of a man who had learned long ago that silence was the most powerful thing in any room. He wasn't wrong. She said yes on a Thursday morning, not because she stopped being afraid, not because the coffee was good or the room was expensive, or because Hyunwoo Jang had a jaw like architecture and eyes that made her feel like a text being read by someone who understood it better than she did. She said yes because her brother Caleb had $73,000 in student loan debt and a letter from his university threatening to suspend his enrollment, and because Layla Washington had done the math, the way she always did the math, and the math said that no amount of dignity was going to solve that problem by Friday. But she had conditions. She laid them out across the table between them, flat and clear, the way you lay tools out before a job. No performance. No apology. She would not be decorative. She would not be silent in rooms where silence cost her something. She would not be humiliated, privately or publicly, for any reason, by any person in his orbit, including him. The money would be transferred in weekly installments to an account he would never have access to. Her brother's debt, all of it, cleared within 48 hours of her signing anything. And the NDA she signed would protect her with the same legal weight it protected him. She wanted her own attorney to review it. She watched his face while she spoke. He didn't flinch, didn't negotiate, didn't pause to consult anyone or step out of the room to make a call. He agreed to every term with the same expression he'd had when he handed her the hood, calm, decided, like he'd already run through this conversation in his mind and arrived at the same destination before she'd even started. That bothered her more than resistance would have. A man who refuses you is a man you can read. A man who gives you everything you ask for without blinking is a man who already knows something you don't. She signed the papers anyway. The next 4 days were work. Rigorous, precise, unglamorous, the kind she understood. They built a story together. Her name would stay, Layla Washington, because changing it created inconsistencies that sharp people noticed. Her background would be expanded, not invented. She'd studied architecture for 2 years before money ended that. They used it. She became someone who moved between worlds by design, not accident. The rehearsals were held in a formal dining room that seated 20 and was set for 2. Teo observed from the corner with the expression of a man attending a procedure he hadn't requested. On the second evening, she caught a placement error, the angle of a fish fork, the kind of detail that only mattered in rooms where every detail was a test. She corrected it without thinking. He stopped, looked at the fork, looked at her. Then he took out his phone and made a note. No irritation, no wounded pride, just a note. She didn't know what to do with that. On the third morning, she brought him coffee in the study and saw, for 4 seconds before he turned and closed it, an acquisition proposal open on the desk. A letterhead she didn't recognize, a crane logo she noted and filed without knowing why. On the third day, she asked him directly. They were walking the grounds, part of the preparation, learning to move beside each other naturally, learning the grammar of proximity. When she stopped and turned to face him. "Why me?" she said. "Specifically, there are women in your world who know the rules, know the stakes, know how to perform this. Why bring in someone from outside? Why bring in someone like me?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the tree line at the edge of the property, bare in the late autumn cold, branches like decisions that hadn't been made yet. "Because everyone in my world," he said finally, "is a move on someone else's board. Every person I could have called, they belong to a side. They have a history. They have a leverage point that someone else already knows about." He looked at her. "You were in that building by accident. You have no allegiances in this world, no debts to anyone in it, no reason to report back to anyone who could use it against me. You're the only person in that garage last night who wasn't already part of the game." A pause. "That makes you the only person I can afford to trust." She didn't tell him how much that sentence revealed about his life. She just nodded, and they kept walking. She found him on the 4th night. She couldn't sleep. The door didn't lock. She'd checked that first night, and the absence of it had stayed with her, an open question she hadn't answered yet. She got up, walked the corridor the way she walked every space she was given, learning it, mapping it, and saw the light from the far sitting room. The door was partially open. He was standing at the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, untouched, the ice long melted. Not looking at anything outside. The window was dark, nothing to see. Just standing, the way people stand when the thing they're looking at is internal. She should have kept walking. She stopped in the doorway. He spoke without turning around, which meant he'd heard her, which meant he always heard everything, which she catalogued and kept. "My father," he said. Not to her, exactly. More like to the room, asterisk. He stopped. The glass turned slightly in his hand. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't seem to know how. The room held that for a moment. Layla leaned against the doorframe. "Maybe," she said quietly, "that's the wrong question." He turned. Not quickly, slowly, the way you turn when something has caught you genuinely off guard and you need a moment before your face can compose itself. He looked at her differently than he had before. Not like a problem. Not like an equation. Not like a calculated risk or a strategic asset. Just differently. She noticed. She wished immediately that she hadn't. Because Layla Washington was a woman who understood structures. And she could feel, in the particular quality of that silence, in the specific weight of the way he was looking at her across that dimly lit room, that something had just shifted in the foundation. And foundations, in her experience, never shifted for free. Nobody tells you what it actually feels like when your world comes apart. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. There's no music, no warning, no slow motion. It's just a drawer that shouldn't have been open, and then it is. And then she was standing in a room that suddenly felt like it had always been a trap, holding paper evidence of something that had happened to her 2 years ago, in a neighborhood 300 miles from this compound, in a fire that took everything her mother had stored in that warehouse and left 40 families standing on a sidewalk in November with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. And the name on the memo in her hands was the same name on the gate she had just walked through. That was how it happened. Quietly. Like a door closing behind her in a room she hadn't known she'd entered. The gala was 8 days after she signed the contract. Layla Washington walked into that room, and she was There is no other word for it. Extraordinary. Not because of the dress, though it was the most expensive thing she had ever worn. Not because of the jewelry or the car or the practiced backstory. But because she had spent years on the edges of rooms like this one. She'd just never been allowed to stand in the center of one before. She was present. Genuinely, completely present, not performing presence, actually there. Noticing everything. Remembering names 30 seconds after hearing them. Asking the one question in every conversation that made the other person feel like the most interesting person in the room. Hyunwoo noticed. She could tell by the way he stopped steering her and simply stayed close. Like a man who had hired someone to hold a painting and discovered they were also an artist. The room noticed too. Rivals. Associates. People whose attention moved across the crowd like surveillance equipment, cataloging, assessing, calculating. She felt their eyes and kept her face open, her posture easy, her hand light on Hyunwoo's arm. Just present enough, just relaxed enough to suggest a woman with nothing to prove and nowhere else she'd rather be. She was very good at the performance of ease. She had been performing it her entire life. Chairman Woo found them at the edge of the room, near the window overlooking the city. He was older than she'd expected from the way others arranged themselves around his name. Mid-60s. Silver at the temples. The kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from a lifetime of understanding that powerful men don't need to move quickly. Things come to them. His eyes went to Layla first. Not with attraction. With assessment. The way a man looks at a variable he hasn't accounted for. Interesting choice of companion, Jang, he said. His English was perfect, precise, each word placed like furniture. Brave even. The subtext was not subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Layla felt Hyunwoo's hand move to the small of her back. Not performed. Not positioned. The gesture arrived before any calculation could have produced it. Instinctive, immediate, the reflex of a man who had decided something without quite knowing he'd decided it. She felt it land like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. She said nothing. Smiled at Chairman Woo with the warm, empty precision of a woman who has heard the threat inside the compliment and chosen not to honor it with a reaction. Woo held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then he moved on. Hyunwoo's hand stayed where it was for another moment before he removed it. He didn't acknowledge it. Neither did she. The compound was quiet when they returned. Past midnight. The staff had withdrawn. Teo was somewhere else in the building, doing whatever Teo did when no one was watching him do it. At the gala, one of Woo's men had leaned across a doorway to speak to someone she couldn't see, and she had caught, for just a second, the flash of something at his cuff. Gold. A bird, a crane, wings extended. She had filed it and moved on, the way she moved on from everything she couldn't immediately place. She had seen that crane before. Not on a person. On a document. She was almost certain of it, the particular unease of a familiar image appearing in the wrong context. She had left it unconnected. It would come. It came at 11:30, in the corridor outside the compound's east wing, when she passed the study and remembered. The acquisition proposal she had glimpsed on Hyunwoo's desk 3 days ago, left open while he took a call, the letterhead visible for the 4 seconds it took her to set down his coffee and leave the room. She hadn't registered it consciously then. Now she did. A crane. Wings extended. The same one. The study door was closed. She tried the handle. It was unlocked. She went in. She went to the desk. The drawer was shut, but the key was in it, turned but not removed, the kind of small oversight that happens when a man believes the house itself is lock enough. She pulled it open. What she found instead was a folder. Photographs first. Aerial shots. Street-level shots. Addresses she recognized. Not because she was familiar with property records, but because she had walked those streets. Her mother's streets. 3 blocks. The warehouse on the corner of DeLand and 9th, before the fire, during the fire, after. Then documents. Internal memos. A property acquisition proposal from a company called Jang Group Development, dated 14 months before the fire. Projected value of the cleared site. Timeline for demolition. The words accelerated vacancy in a bullet point that she read 3 times before she understood what it meant. Get the families out faster. By any means necessary. Before the scheduled date, before they were ready, before anyone could object, because the site was worth more empty than it was with people still using it. 3 weeks before the fire, someone had signed off on accelerated vacancy. The warehouse had not been empty when it burned. It had been full of the stored belongings of 40 families who could not afford to move them yet. Her mother's furniture, her grandmother's photographs, Caleb's childhood, all of it. Accelerated vacancy. She stood in that room for a long time. She wasn't sure how long. Long enough for the heat to go out of her hands. Long enough for the part of her that had been quietly, dangerously beginning to trust this man to go very, very still. He found her there. She heard him in the doorway. Didn't turn around. Just held up the memo in one hand without looking at him. An offering, or an accusation, or both. How much of this was you? The silence that followed was the kind that contains a decision being made. She heard him cross the room. Heard him stop a few feet away. My father ordered it, he said. I found out after. I've been trying to. Trying to what? She turned then. And for one moment, just one, before she could stop it, everything she had held in place for the last 8 days came through her face at once. Not anger. Something rawer than that. The specific grief of a person who had almost let themselves believe something, and had been wrong. She felt it happen and couldn't prevent it, and hated that he was the one watching it. Then it was gone. Locked back where she kept things. But he had seen it, and whatever he saw made him stop. Trying to what, Hyunwoo? Buy your way clean? Is that what the compound is? The suits. The 6-week contract with the night shift janitor, whose mother lost everything in a fire your family decided to call a real estate strategy. He didn't look away. Didn't reach for an explanation that would cost him less. That was the part she couldn't reconcile. He just stood there and took it, like a man who believed he had it coming, which was its own kind of unbearable. I found out 14 months after, he said. I have been. I don't want to know what you've been doing, she said. I want to go home. She walked past him, down the corridor, through the entrance hall, to the front door, which she opened, which let in the cold night air, and then she stopped, because the gate at the end of the drive was closed, and beyond it, on the road, parked at an angle that blocked both directions, were 2 black vehicles she had never seen before. Engines off, lights off, but occupied. She could tell from the way the darkness inside, each one sat differently from an empty car. Teo appeared beside her from nowhere, the way he always appeared, like a man who existed specifically in the moments you needed to be told something you didn't want to hear. They've been there for 40 minutes, he said quietly. Chairman Wu's people. They followed us from the gala. She stared at the gate. They're not here for Hyunwoo, Teo said. They're here because of what you represent to him now. What they think you know. What they think he's told you. He paused. You stopped being a fake fiancé approximately 4 hours ago, Ms. Washington. I'm sorry nobody warned you in advance. The cold came in through the open door. She stood in it. She had signed a contract to pretend to be in danger. She had not signed a contract to actually be in it. And yet here she was, caught between a man whose family had helped destroy hers and men outside the gate who didn't know that and didn't care, who only knew that she was standing next to someone they wanted to remove from the board. She was a target now, not for anything she'd done, for simply having been seen. There is a particular kind of trapped that has nothing to do with locked gates. Layla Washington had been physically trapped before, in bad apartments, in bad jobs, in the specific financial corner that closes around you so gradually you don't notice the walls until you can't stretch your arms out anymore. She knew that kind of trapped. But standing in the doorway of that compound with Chairman Wu's men idling on the road beyond the gate, and a man behind her whose family name was on the memo that burned her mother's memories to ash. That was a different architecture entirely. That was trapped in every direction simultaneously. And the only person who could explain any of it was the one she'd just decided she couldn't trust. Teo came to her room before dawn. He knocked, which surprised her. She hadn't taken him for a man who knocked. He sat across from her in the chair by the window, upright, precise, his hands on his knees, and he spoke with the particular reluctance of someone who has decided that honesty, in this specific moment, is the most tactically sound option available. He told her about Chairman Wu, that Wu had known for 8 months that Hyunwoo was moving against him, and had been waiting for an opening. The engagement withdrawal was almost that moment. Layla's presence at the gala had closed it. The engagement announcement had not been his choice. The organization's council had mandated it, a stability signal, a message to rivals that the leadership transition was settled. He had complied because refusal would have cost him the position he needed to finish what he'd started. And the woman who was originally announced, Layla said, withdrew when she understood what the role actually required, Teo said. She was not wrong to. Layla absorbed that. Chairman Wu, she said. Teo's expression shifted, barely, but she caught it. The first real emotion she'd seen from him. Wu has known for 8 months that Hyunwoo is moving against him. He's been waiting for an opening, a moment of visible weakness he could use to justify removing him. The engagement withdrawal was almost that moment. You prevented it, simply by existing. So he wants Hyunwoo gone. And now he wants you gone too, because you have been seen publicly as someone Hyunwoo protects. In Woo's world, that makes you information. Leverage. A pressure point. He looked at her steadily. Ms. Washington, whether you believe Hyunwoo or not, whether you forgive him, trust him, or never speak to him again after this is over, none of that is relevant to what is parked outside that gate. They don't know your feelings about the warehouse fire. They don't know your contract or your brother's debt or your thermos of coffee. They only know what they saw at that gala. A woman standing beside a man they want removed. He stood. You matter to him. They believe that. Right now, that belief is more dangerous to you than anything else in this situation. He left. She sat with that for a long time. The worst part, the part she turned over and over in the early morning silence, was that he hadn't said Hyunwoo's feelings weren't real. He'd just said they didn't matter. Those were two entirely different things. And the distinction was doing something to her she didn't have language for yet. They moved to the safe house at noon. A different vehicle. A different route. Teo driving, 2 others following at distance. The safe house itself was smaller than the compound. A converted farmhouse 40 minutes further from the city, sparse, functional, the kind of place designed to be forgotten. There was one common room. A kitchen. 2 bedrooms on opposite ends of a narrow hallway. Before he positioned outside, Teo handed her a phone. Small black, a prepaid. My number and Hyunwoo's are already in it, he said. Don't use your own phone. She put it in her pocket without asking who the emergency contact was. By evening, it was just the 2 of them. Teo and the others had positioned outside, perimeter, he said, which meant the inside was theirs. No staff. No performance. No reason to be anything except exactly what they were. 2 people in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, one of whom had every reason to hate the other, both of whom were in danger they had arrived at from completely different directions. She found him before dinner in the narrow room off the entrance hall that served as a secondary office. Standing at the window with his back to the door, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He was on the phone. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see, from where she stood in the corridor, that he had a photograph in his hand. Small, worn at the edges, the kind of thing that has been handled many times. He looked at it while he listened to whatever was being said to him. Then he set it face down on the desk beside him, very carefully, the way you set down something you are not finished with, but cannot look at right now. She didn't go in. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there for a moment, in the corridor of a farmhouse she didn't know, watching a man she had every reason to distrust do something entirely private that he believed no one was seeing. Then she went to the kitchen and started on dinner. They ate in the kitchen without discussing it. Layla made the food because she needed something to do with her hands. He washed the dishes without being asked. They didn't speak for almost an hour. Then she asked the question, "Did you know it was me? When you found me in the car, when you opened that door and looked at me, did you already know who I was?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "No." A pause. "I looked you up after. Standard procedure. Anyone who enters a vehicle in my security detail gets a full background search within the hour. Your name came up. Your address. Your employment record." Another pause. Longer. "And the fire," he said. She waited. "I almost sent you home. That night, before you woke up, before any of this. I had a car arranged. An envelope with enough money to cover the inconvenience and the silence. I was going to have Teo handle it before morning. Why didn't you? The room held the question. He turned and looked at her across the small kitchen, in the particular light of a farmhouse at dusk, with no entourage and no performance and nothing between them except the truth of where they both were. I had a car arranged. That night, before you woke up, before any of this. An envelope with enough to cover the inconvenience and the silence. I was going to have Teo handle it before morning. Clean. Simple. The obvious move. A pause. I sat with it for an hour. The car was running. The envelope was ready. Another pause, shorter, harder. I sent the car away empty. She looked at him. But not the whole truth, she said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She set her cup down. Teo told me about the council, she said. The engagement mandate. He told me the operational version. Hyunwoo nodded once. He's good at that. He left out your father. The kitchen held that for a moment. My father built something real once, he said. Before it became this. The transition wasn't a single decision. It was 100 small ones, each reasonable in isolation, catastrophic in accumulation. By the time he understood what he'd built, he was inside it too deeply to find the walls. A pause. I inherited it at 31. I've spent 3 years trying to end it without burning everything down in the process. He looked at the table. Teo calls it removing weight-bearing elements. I call it trying to remember which version of my father I'm supposed to be. She recognized something in it, not the words, which he hadn't finished then, but the shape of what he was carrying. She had seen it in a sitting room in the dark, in an unfinished sentence and a glass he hadn't touched. This time he was saying them to her. She reached across the table. Not dramatically. Not with any particular intention she could have named. She just reached. And her hand found his where it rested on the table, and she left it there. He didn't move. He didn't pull away. They sat like that in the fading light. A woman who had every reason to walk out, and a man who had no right to ask her to stay, holding a silence that had shifted into something neither of them had agreed to and both of them could feel. This is a terrible idea, she said. I know, he said. And that was all. That was enough. Which is exactly when her phone, the secondary one Teo had given her, the one only 3 people had the number for, lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words. Your brother works for us. She stared at the screen, and the warmth of the last 30 seconds drained out of the room like water through a crack in the floor. She had spent 6 weeks believing she was the only person in the room with clean hands. She was wrong. Not because she had done anything, but because in the world she had walked into, the world she had been pulled into, through a car door in a parking garage on a night, she was only there by accident. Clean hands were not determined by what you did. They were determined by what you were connected to, who had touched you, who had used you without your knowledge, counting on the fact that you would never think to look. Caleb Washington was 23 years old. He was studying mechanical engineering. He tutored younger students on weekends to cover his textbooks. He called his sister every Sunday at 7 p.m. and asked how she was doing before she could ask him first. He had been working for a courier company called Meridian Bridge Logistics for 8 months. The pay was good, better than it should have been for the hours, which Layla now understood was not a coincidence. The packages were always sealed. The drop-offs were always at addresses that changed. He had never asked questions because he needed the money, and the job had appeared at exactly the moment he needed it to, which was also, Layla now understood, not a coincidence. She had noticed the pay was better than it should have been. She had told herself that Caleb had finally caught a break, and that some things didn't need to be examined too closely when the alternative was watching him work 3 jobs through an engineering degree. She had chosen, deliberately and consciously, not to look. That choice had a cost she was only now adding up. Meridian Bridge Logistics was a front company. It belonged to Chairman Wu. Her brother had been inside this world the entire time she had been trying to navigate the edges of it, and neither of them had known. The message on the secondary phone was followed 20 minutes later by a call. She answered it in the narrow hallway outside the kitchen, her back against the wall, her voice very level. That he had this number told her something she didn't have time to fully process. Someone inside the compound had given it to him, or he had people capable of obtaining it anyway. Either way, the circle she had believed she was inside had a gap in it she hadn't seen. Chairman Wu did not introduce himself. He didn't need to. Your brother is a good worker, he said. Reliable. Punctual. No trouble at all. I noticed his name 8 weeks ago. The same name, the same address, the same mother. I wondered then whether it was coincidence. I decided to wait and see what use it might become. She said nothing. He doesn't know what he's been carrying. I want to be clear about that. He's an innocent party. As were you, until recently. What do you want? What Zhang has on me? Documents, recordings, financial records, whatever he has compiled in the last 3 years. You've been inside that compound. You've been trusted with access. I want what he has. And if I bring it to you, your brother's record stays clean. He walks away from Meridian Bridge Logistics with a reference and no questions asked. That is the good version of this. A pause, brief, deliberate. The pause of a man who has learned that silence is where the real message lives. The other version is that I have 8 months of his routes, his drop-offs, his signatures on manifests for sealed packages he never thought to question. I have people who will say, very credibly, that he knew exactly what he was carrying. That version takes approximately 4 days to construct and approximately 4 years of his life to survive. He's 23. I'd encourage you to consider what 4 years costs a person at 23. A pause. You have 24 hours, Ms. Washington. I'd encourage you not to spend them having a conversation with Zhang about this call. The line went dead. She stood in the hallway. From the kitchen, she could hear Hyunwoo moving. The quiet sounds of a man who had no idea that the architecture of the last 6 weeks had just been rearranged around him in the space of a 4-minute phone call. She walked to the kitchen doorway. He was at the counter, his back to her, looking at something on a tablet. Operational, always operational, the part of him that never fully stopped running the numbers. She opened her mouth. And then she stopped. Not because she lost her nerve. Layla Washington had never in her life lost her nerve. She stopped because something arrived in her mind with the cold clarity of a thing that has always been true but needed the right moment to surface. She had been used. By Hyunwoo, not maliciously, not with full knowledge of what she was walking into, but used nonetheless. Placed in a role. Given a script. Positioned on a board she hadn't been shown. And now Chairman Wu was trying to use her in the same way, from the opposite direction. The same mechanism. That her love for her brother was a lever any powerful man could reach for. 2 men. 2 agendas. One Layla Washington, standing in the middle, being asked by both of them to make a decision that served neither her nor Caleb, but only the outcome one of them wanted. She had been so focused on surviving Hyunwoo that she had almost walked straight into Woo's hand. She looked at Hyunwoo's back for a long moment. Then she walked quietly to her room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and she thought. She had a journalist's phone number in her personal phone. Not the secondary one Teo had given her, her own phone, the one with the cracked screen, which felt like a different lifetime now. She had his number. She had kept it for 14 months without knowing why. Now she knew. She looked at it now. She had 2 options in front of her that powerful men had constructed for her. Bring Woo what he wanted. Tell Hyunwoo about the call, and let him construct a third option she'd have no control over. She chose neither. She opened her phone case, found the card, and typed a message that was 11 words long. I've seen things. I'm ready to talk. Can you protect a source? The reply came in 4 minutes. Yes. When? Now, she typed. But I need my brother protected first. He's connected to Meridian Bridge Logistics. I need that documented before anything goes public. A longer pause. Send me what you have. I'll have our legal team on Caleb's situation by morning. She sat with the phone in her hands. Then she began methodically, from memory, to write down every document she had seen in that study. Every name on every memo. Every date. The property acquisition timeline. The warehouse. The 40 families. The words accelerated vacancy in a bullet point that a man had signed his name beneath and believed would stay buried forever. She wrote for 2 hours. She was not shaking. She was not afraid. She was doing what she had always done, moving through a space that underestimated her, seeing everything, waiting for the moment when what she'd seen could finally mean something. That moment was now. In the kitchen at the end of the hallway, Hyunwoo Jang was still running his numbers, still managing his board, still believing that the most significant variable in his current situation was outside the gate. He had not yet understood that the most significant variable had been in the room with him the entire time. Layla Washington pressed send. Down the hallway, she could hear the faint sound of him setting his cup down on the kitchen table. The small, ordinary sound of a man who did not yet know that the world had just moved beneath him. Osei's legal team contacted Caleb within hours of receiving her notes, before anything was published, before anything was public. That part moved fast because it had to. The article itself took 4 days. Verification, legal clearance, editorial review. The machinery of making something unimpeachable before releasing it into the world. Caleb Washington was told, carefully and completely, what he had been unknowingly part of for 8 months. He was told he was not in trouble. He was told his name would not appear in any publication. He was told that someone who loved him had made sure of that before anything else. The article published on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. By 6:15, it had been shared 4,000 times. By 7, 3 major outlets had picked up the thread. By 8, 2 of Chairman Woo's front companies had frozen accounts. By 9, there were attorneys making calls that other attorneys were refusing to return. By 10, Chairman Woo's leverage over Caleb Washington was worth exactly nothing. Because you cannot threaten a person with information that is already public, already documented, already in the hands of people whose entire function is to make sure it stays that way. He called his sister immediately. She didn't answer. He called again. Then he left a voicemail that she would listen to 4 times before she trusted herself to respond. His voice doing the thing it did when he was trying not to cry, which was get very steady and very quiet, saying, "I don't know everything that happened. I don't need to. I just need you to know that I know what you did. And I need you to know that I'm—" A pause, long enough to contain something he couldn't finish. "Just call me back." "Okay, call me back." She didn't answer. Not yet. Because she was sitting in a hallway of a farmhouse 40 minutes outside the city, watching Hyunwoo Jang read the article on his tablet with an expression she had never seen on his face before and couldn't fully name. It wasn't fury. She had braced for fury. It was something quieter than that. Something that looked, from where she was sitting, uncomfortably close to recognition. He had been weeks away from his own version of it. She had done it in one night. Differently. Faster. Without his knowledge, without his control, without the careful architecture he had spent almost a year constructing. And it had worked. He hadn't needed Teo to tell her that. She had been in the room when he sent it away. He set the tablet down on the kitchen table, looked at it for a moment, then looked at her in the doorway. "You didn't trust me," he said. Not an accusation. An observation. The same tone he had used the very first morning, in the very first room, studying her like a problem he hadn't expected. Precise. Honest. Stripped of everything except what it actually was. "No," she said. "I trusted myself." That's different. The room held that. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she felt the weight of everything the last 6 weeks had been, compressed into the specific gravity of this single moment. The parking garage. The hood. The coffee made exactly right. The gala. The file. The farmhouse. The hand she had reached for across a table in fading light. "You could have told me about Woo's call," he said. "I would have. I know what you would have done," she said. "You would have handled it. Contained it. Made it part of your plan on your timeline with your parameters." She paused. My brother is not a parameter. He had nothing to say to that. Because she was right, and he knew it, and he was whatever else he was, not a man who argued with things that were true. "You beat me to it," he said quietly. And there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not defeat. Something more complex than that. Something that sounded like a man encountering, for the first time in a long time, someone he could not get ahead of. "Yes," she said simply. He nodded once, looked at the table, then looked back at her. And neither of them said anything else, because everything that needed to be said had been, and everything that didn't need to be said was already understood. He picked up the tablet, set it face down on the table. Then he picked up his phone. She watched him type something, unhurried, deliberate, the the same economy of movement he brought to everything. He didn't explain what he was doing. He didn't look up. When he set the phone down, he said, without looking at her, "I'm sending them what I have. 11 months of it. It goes to the same investigators your journalist activated, folded into what you started." A pause. "It's not my case anymore. It's the right case. There's a difference." She looked at him across the kitchen of the farmhouse. This man who had spent 11 months building something precise and controlled and entirely his own, and had just sent it away to become part of something he would not control and could not architect and would not get credit for. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He wasn't doing it for her response. That was the point. The contract expired on a Friday. The public dissolution of the engagement was handled through a brief, carefully worded statement released by Hyunwoo's legal team. No drama. No explanation. The kind of ending that powerful people arrange when they want the story to stop being told. Chairman Woo was navigating consequences that would occupy him for a very long time. His leverage, his front companies, his carefully constructed architecture of pressure. All of it was being examined by people with subpoenas and time on their hands. He was not, for the foreseeable future, anyone's problem except his own. Layla Washington went home. She called her mother. She had dinner with Caleb, who asked 3 times what had actually happened and accepted, with the grace of someone who loves you enough to let you keep some things, her answer of "it's complicated." 3 weeks later she started a new job, an architectural firm, a foot in a door she had tried once before and couldn't afford to keep knocking on. It wasn't much. It was hers. She did not think about Hyunwoo Jang every day. Most days. The car appeared on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the contract ended. She was walking out of the architectural firm at the end of her shift. Early evening, the city finding its second wind around her, when she saw it parked at the curb across the street. Blacked out. Bulletproof. The particular stillness of a vehicle that costs more than most people's annual income and makes no apology for it. She stopped on the sidewalk. She did not run. She did not reach for her phone. She did not calculate an exit. She just stood there in the early evening air and waited because she had learned, over the course of the most disorienting 6 weeks of her life, that some things deserved to be met directly. The window rolled down. Hyunwoo Jang looked at her from the passenger seat. Not the driver's seat. He was not here in any official capacity. No Teo visible. No entourage. Just a man in a dark coat in the passenger seat of a car he had asked someone else to drive. "I'm not here to offer you anything," he said. She looked at him. "Then why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the street ahead of him, the city doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous. "I sent the car away empty," he said. "The night you were in it. Before any of this. I had an envelope ready. A car running. The clean version of events." A pause. "I've been trying to understand why I didn't." The city moved around them. "I think," he said, "it was the first decision in a long time that felt like mine." He looked at her then. Not with the expression of a man delivering something. With the expression of a man who has just understood something and is not entirely comfortable with it. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I just needed you to know that you exist in my life as a choice. Not a variable. Not a calculation." A pause, shorter than the others, harder. "That's new." She stood on the sidewalk. She thought about the parking garage. The hood. The thermos of coffee she'd left in the break room of the Meridian Tower the night she covered Dion's shift and changed the entire direction of her life by climbing into the wrong car. She thought about her mother's furniture, burned to nothing in November. She thought about Caleb's voice on the phone when he finally understood what she had done for him without telling him she was doing it. She thought about a farmhouse at dusk and a hand she had reached for without deciding to. She thought about what it meant to choose something that had no clean answer, in a life that had taught her to only move toward things she could calculate. She looked at Hyunwoo Jang for a long moment. Then she crossed the street, opened the door, and got in. She had climbed into that car the first time because she had no choice. She climbed in this time because she did. They feel like gravity.